It was one of those calm summer evenings when the air feels soft and warm, and the sun hangs low like it doesn't want to leave. The street was quiet except for the sound of basketballs bouncing at the neighborhood court. A teenage boy walked home, his backpack hanging loosely from one shoulder, his shoes scuffed from hours of playing. He had been there since school let out, losing track of time, thinking only about the upcoming trials for the city's youth basketball league. He was tall and lean, wearing a gray hoodie and dark sweatpants, earbuds tucked in, lost in his own rhythm. He walked with the easy stride of someone who knew every corner of his neighborhood, every streetlight, every cracked sidewalk. It was his routine. He always walked home this way, usually stopping by the corner store to grab a drink before heading back to help his mom with dinner. Tonight, though, he felt something off, a feeling he couldn't name at first. The hum of an engine behind him grew louder, and when he turned his head slightly, he noticed flashing lights reflecting on the pavement. He froze for a second, then told himself it couldn't be for him. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He kept walking, trying to look calm even though his chest had started to tighten. The car slowed down beside him, a white police cruiser with its windows halfway rolled down. 2 officers sat inside. The one driving called out, "Hey kid, stop right there." The boy stopped. He pulled out one earbud, unsure what to say. "What's your name?" the officer asked, stepping out of the car. Why?" he asked carefully. His voice came out quiet, uncertain. "You match a description," the officer said, glancing him up and down. "We've had reports of someone breaking into cars in this area." The boy blinked, confused. "I just came from the court. I live 2 blocks away. ID?" the other officer said sharply. I think it's in my bag," he replied, pointing toward his backpack. "Don't move," the first officer said quickly. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The boy's heart started to race. He felt his stomach drop as the weight of the situation hit him. He remembered the things his mother had told him. Always stay calm, keep your hands visible, don't talk back, and don't run. He took a slow breath, trying to steady himself. "I'm not moving," he said quietly. "My ID is in my front pocket. If you want, I can—" "Didn't I tell you not to move?" the officer interrupted, stepping closer. His hand hovered near his holster. People driving by began to slow down. A woman across the street paused while watering her plants, watching silently. The air around the boy felt heavy. He didn't understand why this was happening. He hadn't done a single thing wrong. The other officer walked around behind him, checking the sidewalk as if looking for something. "Empty your pockets," he said. "I don't have anything," the boy said. His voice cracked slightly, betraying his fear. "Then show me," the officer replied. He hesitated, not sure what to do. Every move felt dangerous now. He lifted his hand slightly and said, "Sir, I don't want any trouble. I'm just going home." The officer gave a short, sharp laugh. "If you didn't do anything, then you don't have anything to worry about. Right?" The boy nodded slowly, but he could tell that wasn't true. He had seen enough videos to know how quickly these things could go wrong. His chest tightened again as one of the officers asked him to turn around. For a moment he thought about running, but his mom's voice echoed in his mind again, calm and steady. "No matter what happens, don't run," so he stood there still and quiet, his hands trembling slightly in the air. The officer began to search his bag, pulling out his basketball, his notebook, and a crushed energy bar wrapper. Nothing else. Still, the man's expression didn't change. "Where do you live?" the officer asked. "2 streets down," the boy replied softly. "I can show you." The officer didn't seem to care. "Why are you walking alone this late?" "It's not late," he said before he could stop himself. "It's just past 7. That earned him a look of irritation. "Watch your tone, kid." He swallowed hard, realizing that even speaking could make things worse. He lowered his eyes, trying to calm the shaking in his hands. The woman across the street took out her phone and began recording. She could see the fear on the boy's face. She didn't know who he was, but something about the scene didn't sit right with her. She had lived there for years, and she had seen enough to know when someone was being treated unfairly. The officers kept questioning him, one asking the same things again and again: where he was going, what he was carrying, who he was with. Each answer only seemed to make them more suspicious. It was as if nothing he said could convince them he was just a normal kid heading home. A few cars passed slowly, their drivers glancing over, unsure whether to stop or keep going. The boy's heart pounded so hard it felt like everyone around could hear it. He wished his mom were there. She always knew what to say when things got out of control. After a few minutes, one officer said, "You got any family around here?" "Yes," he said quickly, "my mom. She works for the government." The officer gave a small smirk like he didn't believe him. "Sure she does," he muttered under his breath. The boy didn't reply. He knew that trying to argue would only make things worse. He stood there feeling smaller and smaller as the seconds dragged on. Then the officer's radio crackled. There was some chatter about a suspect seen on another street, a completely different direction from where they were. The two officers exchanged glances. "Looks like we might have the wrong guy," one of them said. But even then, they didn't apologize. They didn't lower their tone. They just told him to stay put while they confirmed. The boy nodded, still too afraid to move. He wanted to go home, to sit at the kitchen table, to tell his mom what happened, but also not tell her because he didn't want her to worry. He wanted to just forget it, but the tightness in his chest told him he wouldn't. Minutes felt like hours. The sky started to dim, the last traces of sunlight fading. The woman across the street kept filming just in case. Finally, one of the officers turned to him again. "All right, kid. You can go." He blinked, confused. "That's it?" "Yeah. Just make sure you stay out of trouble," the man said, his tone dismissive. The boy opened his mouth to speak, but then closed it. There was nothing he could say that would make any of it make sense. He picked up his backpack, his hands still shaking, and started walking again. As he walked away, he heard one of the officers laugh quietly and say something he couldn't catch. He didn't look back. He just kept walking, one step after another, until the police car's lights faded behind him. By the time he reached his street, the world felt different, smaller, quieter, colder. He had walked this way hundreds of times before, but tonight every sound made him jump a little. A dog barking, a car door closing, the rustle of wind in the trees, all of it made him flinch. When he finally reached his house, he stood on the porch for a moment before unlocking the door. He didn't want his mom to see his face yet. He didn't want to explain why his voice might shake or why his eyes were wet. Inside, the house smelled like dinner. Something was cooking on the stove, and for a second, that warmth wrapped around him like a blanket. He closed the door softly, dropped his backpack, and leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. He thought about how fast everything had changed, from an ordinary walk home to something that felt like a nightmare. He couldn't understand why they had looked at him like that, why they assumed the worst before even asking a real question. He went to his room, sat on the edge of his bed, and stared at his basketball on the floor. His hands were still trembling. He clenched them into fists and then opened them again over and over, trying to stop the shaking. Outside, a car passed by, headlights sweeping across his window. He jumped again, then laughed softly at himself, though there was no real humor in it. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying every second. The way the officers looked at him, the way one of them had rested a hand near his weapon, the way everyone just watched. He didn't know that the woman who had been recording was already sharing the video online, hoping someone would see it and understand what was wrong with that picture. And he didn't know that his mother would soon get a call about it, that the calm before the real storm was almost over. For now, all he could do was lie there, listening to the muffled sounds of the city outside, wondering how something so normal could turn into something that made him feel so small, so powerless and so angry all at once. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "I didn't do anything wrong." But the quiet answer in his heart was that sometimes, doing nothing wrong still wasn't enough. The next morning started quiet, but the air in the house felt different. The boy woke up earlier than usual, long before his alarm. His body felt heavy, like he hadn't really slept at all. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face. For a few seconds, he almost convinced himself that what happened last night was just a dream. But then he looked at his backpack lying by the door and felt that uneasy feeling return. He walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, and stared at himself in the mirror. There was nothing unusual about him, just a regular 16-year-old. But after last night, he couldn't stop wondering if other people saw something different when they looked at him, something that made them suspicious, something that made them afraid. Downstairs, the smell of coffee drifted through the kitchen. His mother was already up, sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone with a serious expression. She looked like she hadn't slept much either. Her hair was pulled back, her work badge clipped neatly to her shirt as always. She was ready for another day at the office, but her eyes had that sharp, focused look he had seen many times before, usually when she was dealing with a tough case or an argument at work. "Morning," she said softly. Glancing up at him, "Morning," he replied, his voice low. He poured himself a glass of water, trying to act normal. But she didn't look away. "You got home late last night," she said. He hesitated. "Yeah, practice went long." She raised an eyebrow. "That so?" He nodded, staring at the table. There was a long silence between them. She could tell something was off, and he knew it. She had always been good at reading people, especially him. After all, that was part of her job. Finally, she said, "Someone sent me a video this morning." He froze, his heart skipping a beat. She turned her phone toward him. On the screen was a video from the neighborhood. 2 officers, flashing lights, and him, standing there, his hands up, his face pale with fear. It was shaky but clear enough to see what had happened. His stomach dropped. Who sent that?" he asked quietly. "A neighbor," she said. "She said she thought I should see it before it spread online. It's already been shared a few hundred times." He sank into the chair opposite her, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to worry," she sighed, setting the phone down. "You thought I wouldn't find out?" He didn't answer. He couldn't look at her. She softened her tone a little. "I know you were scared," she said, "but you should have called me right away. You know I would have come." He nodded slowly. "I just wanted to forget about it." Her eyes filled with quiet anger, not at him but at what she saw in that video. She reached across the table, resting her hand over his. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said firmly. "Do you understand that?" He nodded again, but his voice trembled when he said, "They didn't care." That simple sentence made her chest tighten. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "I'm going to handle this," she said. He looked up quickly. "Please don't make it worse." "I'm not," she replied. "But I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen either. Those officers need to be held accountable." He didn't argue, but his shoulders slumped. He knew once his mom decided something, there was no stopping her. She wasn't just any parent, she worked in law enforcement herself, though on the government side. She understood the system better than most. She knew how to get answers when others couldn't. She stood up and poured herself another cup of coffee. Her expression was calm, but he could see her mind working. "What exactly did they say to you?" she asked. He told her everything. The flashing lights, the questions, how they made him empty his bag, how scared he felt. She listened without interrupting, her hand tightening around her mug every few minutes. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "Thank you for telling me." He didn't know what she was planning, but the tone of her voice made it clear she was serious. After breakfast, she dropped him off at school like usual. The car ride was quiet. He kept staring out the window, watching the houses go by. He could feel everyone looking at him differently now. Some kids had already seen the video online. He heard whispers in the hallway, some kids asking if it was really him. Others gave him sympathetic looks like they didn't know what to say. He tried to focus in class, but his mind kept drifting. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the red and blue lights flashing. Meanwhile, his mother spent her morning making phone calls. She contacted her department's legal division first, then the local precinct. She spoke firmly, professionally, and without emotion. Her position gave her access most people didn't have. She wasn't going to yell or threaten anyone. She knew the system worked best when you spoke its language. By lunchtime, she had a meeting scheduled with the precinct's duty sergeant. She didn't tell them she was the mother of the boy in the video. She just said she wanted to discuss a community incident involving youth police interaction. At the same time, the video was spreading faster online. People were commenting, sharing, and debating. Some were angry, others defensive, but most were simply shocked at how calm the boy had been despite everything. The woman who had filmed it gave a short interview to a small local reporter, saying she recorded because she didn't want anything bad to happen. By evening, the story had already reached the local news station's social media page. It wasn't national attention, but it was enough to make the department notice. The boy's phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from friends, teammates, even strangers poured in. Some said they supported him. Some told him to stay strong. But every time he saw the video, he felt that same sick feeling in his stomach. He didn't want to be known for this. He just wanted to go back to normal. That evening, when his mother came home, her expression was firm but tired. She placed her bag on the counter and said, "I met with the precinct today." He looked up, nervous. "What did they say?" "They said they're reviewing body camera footage," she replied. They admitted the stop shouldn't have gone that far. The officers didn't follow full protocol. He frowned. "So that's it? They just say sorry and move on?" Her jaw tightened. "Not quite. They're going to have to answer some questions, and I'll make sure they do." He didn't respond. He just stared at the floor. After a long pause, she sat beside him. "Listen," she said gently. "I know you didn't want all this attention, but you did nothing wrong. Don't carry their mistake like it's yours." He swallowed hard. "It just doesn't feel fair." "It's not," she said quietly. "But fairness isn't something that just happens. Sometimes you have to fight for it. That's why I do what I do." Her voice softened then. "When I joined the service, I promised myself I'd use this badge to protect people who didn't have one. Yesterday, that person was you." He nodded slowly. For the first time since it happened, a small part of him felt safe again. Later that night, while he was doing homework, he heard his mother talking on the phone in the next room. Her voice was calm but steady. She was giving a detailed account of the incident, referencing department policies and local procedure codes. He didn't understand most of it, but he knew she was building something, a record, maybe a report. He looked out his window. The same streetlight glowed faintly over the sidewalk where he had been stopped. It looked ordinary again, but to him it would never feel the same. A few days passed and the attention grew. Local reporters wanted interviews. The school even held an assembly about community trust and respect. He sat through it quietly, not wanting to be recognized, but everyone knew anyway. Teachers treated him differently now, some overly kind, some awkward. His mother told him not to worry about what people said. She reminded him that truth takes time to rise above noise. But still, when he walked home each evening, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every sound behind him made him look over his shoulder. He carried his ID in his pocket now, always ready, just in case. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low, a police cruiser turned onto his street again. His heart skipped, but this time it slowed down near his house and then drove away. Still, his hands clenched tightly until it disappeared. Inside, his mother was at the kitchen table again, paperwork spread out in front of her. When she saw his face, she smiled faintly. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, just tired." She closed her files and looked at him for a long moment. "This isn't over yet," she said softly, "but it will be soon." He didn't know what she meant exactly, but he believed her. She wasn't just his mom. She was someone who knew how to make people listen. As he went upstairs that night, he glanced back down at her. She sat there, focused and steady, her badge beside her coffee cup, her face calm but determined. He didn't realize it yet, but the next time those officers saw her, they would understand exactly who they had stopped and why their actions would never be ignored again. The following week began like any other, but the tension in the air hadn't faded. The boy tried to act normal. He went to school, met his friends, played basketball, but something in him had changed. He laughed less. He looked around more. Even when everything seemed calm, he couldn't shake the memory of those flashing lights. People still talked about the video. Some kids at school treated him like a local celebrity, saying things like, "You're famous now," though he hated hearing that word. Others didn't say anything, but their eyes said enough. He just wanted everyone to forget. His mother, though, was moving in the opposite direction. She wasn't letting it go. She had filed a formal complaint and was waiting for a meeting with the precinct's internal affairs team. She didn't raise her voice about it. She didn't post online. She simply gathered her documents, reviewed policies, and prepared. Every night she sat at the kitchen table after dinner, her laptop open, papers spread across the tablecloth. She didn't talk much while she worked, but her face showed a quiet fire. The boy would sometimes peek over her shoulder and see spreadsheets, case summaries, official reports, things he couldn't fully understand. One evening he asked, "Why are you doing all this yourself?" She gave him a look that made him stop mid-sentence. Procedure is not an excuse for poor judgment. And body cameras? Are they on? Both men glanced at each other before answering. "Yes, ma'am," one said quietly. "Good," she replied. "Then we'll have no trouble reviewing them, will we?" The silence stretched. A few neighbors were still watching from their porches, their phones raised. The flashing lights reflected in their faces. The tension that had once made everyone afraid now shifted into something else, something like disbelief. The crowd could sense that the power balance had completely changed. The boy's mother stepped closer to her son and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He nodded but didn't say a word. His heart was still racing. He had no idea how to process everything happening around him. One minute he was terrified he'd be handcuffed for no reason, and the next, his mother was standing in front of him like a shield. She turned to the officers again. "You see this?" she said quietly, gesturing to her son. "He's 16. He goes to school 2 blocks from here. He plays basketball. He's never been in trouble. And tonight you decided to make him a target. Why?" Neither of them answered. They shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence gone. The taller officer finally muttered something about misunderstanding and protocol, but his voice was barely above a whisper. She nodded slowly, taking in every word. "Misunderstanding," she repeated softly as if testing the word. "You don't get to make that kind of mistake when a child's life is on the line." Her calm was the kind that made people listen. It wasn't about shouting or threats, it was about truth. She'd spent her career in rooms where people lied and deflected, and she could see it happening here too. But this time it was personal. "Do you know what it's like for a mother to get a call that her son is surrounded by police?" she asked quietly. "To imagine the worst because she's seen it happen to others?" Her eyes glistened under the streetlights, but her voice didn't shake. "He did everything you're supposed to do." He stopped. "He followed instructions. And still you treated him like a criminal." The officers both started talking at once, trying to explain that they didn't mean any harm. She held up a hand. "Enough. You'll give me your badge numbers, your supervisor's contact, and a copy of the report you'll be filing." "Because there will be a report," they nodded quickly. One scribbled something on his notepad and handed it over. The boy's mother took the paper and folded it neatly, slipping it into her purse. Then she turned back to her son. "We're going home," she said softly. He looked at her, unsure if it was really over. "Can I move now?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said, giving him a small smile that tried to hide her anger. "You can move." As they started walking toward her car, the neighbors began to lower their phones, murmuring to each other. Some gave her small nods of respect. A few even clapped quietly, but she didn't react. She just kept walking, her hand on her son's back. When they reached the car, he hesitated before getting in. "Mom," he said softly, "you didn't have to come like that." "I was okay." She looked at him with tired eyes. "You weren't okay," she said. "You were scared. I could hear it in your voice when the neighbor called. And I wasn't going to let you stand there alone." He nodded, staring out the window as she started the car. The flashing lights faded behind them. Neither spoke for a while. The only sound was the soft hum of the engine and his uneven breathing. She glanced at him once, noticing the way his hands still trembled slightly. At a red light, she finally said, "You did everything right. You stayed calm. That's what matters." He turned to look at her. "It didn't feel like it mattered," he said quietly. "They didn't care what I said," she sighed. "I know, that's the hardest part. Sometimes doing the right thing still isn't enough, but you're safe now. That's what counts." He looked back at the road, the city lights passing by. "Do you think they'll get in trouble?" he asked after a moment. "They'll be investigated," she said firmly, "and I'll make sure of it. Not because I want revenge, but because this has to stop happening." He didn't say anything after that. He just leaned back against the seat, exhausted. The night had felt like it lasted forever. His mind replayed everything. The lights, the voices, the way his heart had pounded when they told him to get on the ground. He thought about how different it felt once his mom showed up, how everything changed the moment she pulled out that badge. It scared him to think what might have happened if she hadn't arrived in time. When they got home, he sat quietly at the kitchen table while she made him a cup of tea. It was late and the house felt still. She set the cup in front of him and finally allowed herself to exhale. The strength she had shown outside melted away, replaced by pure relief. "You know," she said softly, sitting across from him, "people think being in my job means you stop being afraid. You don't, you just learn how to use it. Tonight I was terrified. But fear can't control you. It has to guide you." He nodded slowly. "I didn't think they'd listen to you," he said after a pause. "They didn't," she replied with a faint smile. "They listened to the badge, but sometimes that's what it takes." He gave a small, tired laugh. "You were amazing," he said quietly. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "No, I was just a mom. Any mother would have done the same." The clock ticked softly on the wall. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet again. She thought about how many stories like this she'd heard in her line of work, stories that didn't end this way. She knew how lucky they were, and that thought made her heart ache. Before going to bed, she checked on him one last time. He was lying awake, staring at the ceiling. She sat on the edge of his bed and brushed his hair back gently, like she used to when he was small. "You're safe," she whispered. "That's all that matters tonight." He smiled faintly, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Thanks, Mom." She nodded, kissed his forehead, and quietly left the room. Downstairs, she sat on the couch in the dark for a long time. The night had shown her once again how fragile safety could be. But it had also reminded her of something else: the power of standing firm, the strength of calm words, and the importance of never staying silent when something isn't right. She glanced at her badge resting on the table, then at the folded note with the officers' names. Tomorrow she would start making calls. But for now she let herself rest. Because tonight she had done what mattered most. She had brought her son home. The morning after felt strange. The sun came through the kitchen window like any other day, but everything felt heavier. The boy sat at the table staring at his cereal, but he wasn't really eating. His mother moved quietly around the kitchen, her work clothes neatly pressed as always, but her eyes looked tired. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those flashing lights again, the look on her son's face, and the way those officers had held their hands close to their belts. She wanted to forget it. But she couldn't. Not when it was her child. Not when it could have gone another way. The boy finally spoke, his voice low. "Are you going to report them?" She paused before answering. "Yes," she said simply. "I already started writing everything down. I'll be calling their department today." He looked up, frowning. "Do you think it'll do anything?" She sighed, sitting down across from him. "It has to," she said. "Even if it doesn't change everything, it matters that we don't stay quiet." He nodded slowly, but didn't look convinced. He still felt shaken. Every time he thought about the way those officers had looked at him, like he was something dangerous, it made his chest tighten. He had done everything right, just like his mom had always taught him. Hands visible, voice calm, no sudden moves. And still it hadn't mattered. After breakfast, she drove him to school. He didn't want to go, but she told him that keeping his routine would help him feel normal again. On the way, the car was quiet. The world outside looked the same. People walking dogs, kids waiting for buses, cars honking. But it all felt different to him now. Before he got out, she said softly, "Call me if anything happens, okay?" He nodded, managing a small smile. "I will, Mom." She watched him walk toward the entrance until he disappeared inside. Only then did she let out a deep breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. At work, she tried to focus on her assignments, but her mind kept drifting back to last night. Every few minutes, she caught herself replaying the moment she pulled up and saw her son standing there with his hands in the air. She clenched her pen tighter each time the image came back. By noon, she couldn't take it anymore. She opened her laptop and began typing her report. Her words were calm and factual, just like her training had taught her. Names, times, descriptions, everything in clear detail. But underneath every sentence was her anger, buried deep but real. When she finished, she attached the video a neighbor had sent her that morning. It showed everything clearly: the flashing lights, the officer's aggressive tone, and her calm but firm arrival. She hit send, and for the first time all day she felt a little lighter. That evening, when her son got home, he seemed quieter than usual. He dropped his backpack on the floor and sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. "People are talking about it," he said suddenly. "About what?" she asked, though she already knew. "The video," he said, looking up at her.
"It's online."
"Somebody posted it. It already has thousands of views." She sat down beside him. On the screen, she saw herself walking toward the officers, her voice steady, her badge shining under the lights. She hadn't expected it to spread so fast. The comments were pouring in, people thanking her, others angry, some sharing their own stories. Her son looked uneasy. "I didn't want people to see me like that," he said quietly. She put her hand on his shoulder. "I know," she said, "but maybe it'll help someone else. Maybe it'll make people think twice." Over the next few days, the story spread further. Local news stations reached out for interviews. Community leaders called her, asking her to speak at meetings. She didn't want the attention, but she also didn't want to waste the moment. So she agreed to one interview. When the reporter came, she spoke clearly, carefully choosing her words. "This isn't just about my son," she said. "It's about every child who deserves to walk home without fear. It's about accountability and change. No one should have to prove they're innocent just because of how they look." The interview aired that night, and the response was overwhelming. Strangers sent messages of support. Parents said her story had made them sit down with their own kids to talk about safety and courage. And at the same time, she could feel the pressure building. Calls from officials, questions from the department, people trying to control the narrative. But she stayed calm through it all. She had been trained for tough situations, and this one mattered more than any case file she had ever handled. Her son, on the other hand, struggled to adjust. At school, some classmates treated him differently. A few called him the kid from the video. Some teachers looked at him with sympathy that made him uncomfortable. He didn't want to be known for that moment. He just wanted to play basketball, hang out with his friends, and be normal again. One afternoon, he stayed late after practice, shooting hoops alone. The sound of the ball hitting the floor echoed through the empty gym. It felt peaceful there, no lights, no cameras, no eyes watching. Just him and the ball. But even then, the memory of that night stayed close. It wasn't something he could just shake off. When his mom came to pick him up, she watched him play for a moment before calling out, "You've still got that shot." He smiled faintly, trying to keep it. She walked over and sat on the bleachers. "You know, when I was your age, I thought the world was a lot simpler. I thought that if you worked hard and stayed honest, everything would be fair." He bounced the ball softly. "And now? Now I know it's more complicated," she said. "But that doesn't mean we stop trying." He nodded slowly, looking thoughtful. For a moment, they sat in silence, just the sound of the basketball rolling on the floor. Then he said, "You think it'll ever change?" She smiled gently. "It already is. Not fast enough, maybe, but people are talking. People are learning. Every time someone stands up, it changes a little more." He looked down, letting her words sink in. "You think I did okay that night?" She looked at him with pride. "You did everything right," she said softly. "You stayed calm, you stayed respectful, and you stayed safe. That's all I could ever ask." He finally smiled, a real one this time. "I just wish it didn't have to happen at all." "So do I," she said. "But maybe what happened to you will help someone else not go through the same thing." Weeks passed, and the official investigation began. The officers were placed on temporary leave while the department reviewed the footage. She was asked to testify, and she did, every word clear and composed. She wasn't there for revenge. She was there for justice, for her son, for the truth. Meanwhile, the boy focused on his schoolwork and basketball. He tried to move forward, but something in him had changed. He was more thoughtful, more aware. He noticed things he used to ignore, the way people stared, the tone of certain conversations, the small, quiet acts of kindness that often went unseen. One evening, his mother found him sitting on the porch, looking up at the sky. The air was cool and the street was quiet again. She sat beside him, wrapping a light shawl around her shoulders. "Thinking about everything?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, it's weird. I feel like I see things differently now." She smiled softly. "That's what growing up feels like. It's not always easy." He looked over at her. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said suddenly. "You didn't yell. You didn't lose control. You just stood there and made them listen." Her eyes softened. "I was proud of you too," she said. "You didn't lose yourself either. That's what strength looks like." They sat there for a while, watching cars pass by. The neighborhood felt calm again, but neither of them would ever forget that night. It had changed them both, not with bitterness, but with purpose. Eventually, the department released its findings. The report confirmed that the officers had acted without proper cause. They would undergo retraining and face disciplinary action. The statement ended with a promise to review policies and improve community trust. It wasn't everything she had hoped for, but it was a start. When she read the report, she closed her eyes and whispered, "That's enough for now." She knew the work wasn't over. It never really was. But this small step mattered. That night, her son came home from practice, tired but smiling. "Coach said I might get to lead next week's game," he said, excitement flickering in his voice. "That's great," she said warmly. You earned it, he nodded, grabbing a bottle of water. It feels good to think about something else again. She smiled. It's okay to move forward. That doesn't mean you forget. It just means you keep living. Later, when he went to bed, she stood by his door for a moment, listening to his quiet breathing. The house was peaceful again, filled with the kind of stillness that had felt impossible a few weeks ago. She walked to the window and looked out at the street. The same street where it had all happened. Now it was just a road again, empty, calm, ordinary. She whispered a silent prayer of thanks and hope. For her son. For change. For every mother who loved their child enough to stand between them and the world. Then she turned off the lights and finally allowed herself to rest, knowing that while fear and injustice still existed, so did courage, and that sometimes, courage was as simple as showing up when it mattered most.